Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Seoul DXB 2018 here in Dubai. Thank you for coming out to support us on this very special day when we are here with none other than a very dear friend and an iconic artist and designer and cultural influencer, Mr. Futura, Lenny McGurr. Give it up.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Carlos.
Just so you know, folks, he's over at the Levi's booth, so please come support, buy some gear. It's a really unique experience getting your customized Futura gear, so hopefully after you come by and support that. So here we are in Dubai, Futura, and one of the things that the pretext of this conversation was graffiti to galleries, but I think when we, in the community, think of you, it's much more expansive than that, and we're going to try to cover a lot of that. But when we think about where we are today, where you are witnessing this kind of refinement of urban culture in terms of design aesthetic, and manufacturing and stuff like that, suffice to say, you've also had an influence and impact on that, and we'll cover that as well. He's had an impact on subway graffiti. Obviously, you've done some incredible work on the trains and left your imprint on that, but you've moved on in other areas which are also very important within the music field, the galleries, and design, and so on. So, as we think about and open this conversation, because you are Futura, and when we say Futura, it's yes, the artist, but also an iconic brand name, right? So the question that I wanted to start off with about all of this.
How did that happen?
No. What is it when the name becomes bigger than the art?
Yeah, I don't think that's happened just yet. We could pump the brakes on that. I mean, hopefully there's still time before my name overshadows my creativity. But without question, my name does cast a shadow, or kind of has what can I say? Not a reputation, but I feel like when I walk into a room and people are like, oh shit, that's Futura, everyone has already kind of got an idea about what that is, who I am, what I do, what I did. And I would like to dispel the rumors and the myths and say, like, a lot of that's bullshit. Because if you really knew me, like you know me, I'd like to think of myself as a super down-to-earth guy, just like local homie, you know, one of your boys, maybe your brother, maybe your uncle, in this case, this kid's father. So, you know, rather than kind of striving to become someone and then like use that as a badge of honor or some kind of a business card, like, oh, you know who I am, I think I'm just too humble of a person to go there. You know, after all these years, and we're talking plus 40, we're pushing 50 years. 68, I would say. I didn't arrive until, I arrived in 55, but 70, when I was 15, that's when I walked through the door of illegality, you're a criminal, you're a vandal.
So that's where you start, the genesis of the identity.
Yes, without question.
The Futura identity.
Well, that was the whole purpose of what we were doing and who we were, is that we all grabbed nom de plumes, pseudonyms, aliases, tag names, some people with multiple tag names because one wasn't good enough, and that's another story about letters and how we were all about letters. It's just sort of the foundation of our culture. And, you know, the old adage, like, what's in a name? Like, what's the name mean? Does the name mean anything? Is it just does it sound cool? Did you like those particular letters? You know, I mean, we all have our handwriting styles and whatever, and we know that, like, oh shit, I'm not really good at making T's or S's. Same thing for us as kids when we got into graffiti. We were like, well, no, I don't want that name because I'm not that good with an X or whatever the name may be. In the case of someone like a Zephyr, I was like, wow, damn, dude, you got a Z, you got a Y, you got an H. It's complicated. So for me, Futura initially was a projection of my sensibility, my mindset. You know, I was influenced by 2001: A Space Odyssey, which also came out in 1968. I was trying to make that 50-year reference. But even in 68, before I saw 2001, there were tags in New York City throughout our subway system, and there was also a lot of graffiti, whether it was personal, like what we were about, you know, where it's like, yo, this is me, look at me, I exist, or anti-war. At the time, we're in Vietnam, back in America, so you have political graph, you have people wanting to make statements, and what better way to do it than in the public space? For me, like I say, Futura was a thought, and the number 2000 was a projection from a 15-year-old kid in 1970 to a place I would never even arrive. You know, it's like, I'm not going to live to be 45. You know, I won't live to the year 2000.
So you arrived to the year 2000. When did you drop the 2000?
99, like when 99 arrived and people started freaking out about Y2K. I don't even, if you guys even know what Y2K was, but Y2K was this assumption or prediction that the world clocks were all going to set back to zero and the banking, like everything was going to get fucked up because the system couldn't handle, you know, this sort of numerical overload of what that was going to be. But I also sensed that, damn, I've arrived. I've dated myself, right? I should have went for the 2001 sequel, which is called 2010, but here we are in 2018, damn near 2020. I mean, I was way short-sighted in my vision of what the future was, because we're in it now, and I don't even feel like I've done anything. You know, it's like, and personally, I'd like to live for another quarter century at least. So at 63, you know, what's that? 88? Nah, fuck it. People are dying at 100. I want 100. So I'm still going with no delay, no sort of pause in my game, you know.
Which, let me circle back to when you were Futura 2000 and in the 70s, because you know, because aside, the premise of this talk too was graffiti to galleries, and his generation was the generation that really started building that blueprint. Cliff and Noga and those guys, young guys that were already talking about some of the ideas that we're discussing now in terms of placement in galleries or with brands and you know, having a profile in spaces that we would not normally have, like with Twyla Thorpe and
well, the UGA with Twyla Thorpe and the Razor Gallery, which was 1973. And so the concept of street art transitioning to the gallery or trying to somehow market what we were doing and make it into some sort of a commodity, because I think initially nobody gave us credit for really being artists. We were just vandals in the street. Some of us, like the Phase 2s, the Riff 170s, the Stay Highs. I mean, there's a litany of guys that can well be Googled. But for me, it was about, I just want to be a member of this community. You know, initially, Futura was just my ID. You know, that's like, it sounded cool. And not for nothing, I mean, I got into graffiti because I came from a kind of broken home, and I saw this movement as something that I can embrace as like brothers and the few sisters we had in arms, you know, and not for nothing, and that's really what it is. I mean, we all, like, you know, me and Merlos and any of the guys from back in the day, and sadly, there's a good 25 or more who are gone, and we didn't even get to the 80s or later 80s when more recognized artists who didn't come from the subway school, Keith, Jean, you know, I don't include Andy, of course, but a lot of people.
We'll lead up to those guys,
Sure.
but what's interesting is that generation that set up Noga and all of this When it comes up to, let's say, about 1980,
Yeah.
this is a very important transition period, 1980.
I think 80 is the most significant
Right.
year for us.
We were up in Sam Esses' studio.
Yes.
And there was also you did the Breako car
Yes.
in 80, right?
In 80, yes.
So this is a really important point because when we were at Sam Esses, a studio situation was set up for some of the elite train riders to come and paint in a studio environment to paint canvas in a formalized situation. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that, and then we'll get into the Breako car.
Sure. So, as we were talking about UGA and the kind of the historical thing that we know is United Graffiti Artists, UGA, was the first organized group of actual street writing vandals, graffiti writing vandals who transitioned into some sort of commercial spaces, i.e. the Razor Gallery and Twyla Tharp, which is was a dance group that was performing in Lincoln Center. I mean, it's really like that. I mean, even now, if you're at Lincoln Center doing something, you're doing something. So you can imagine in 1973 that someone like me, I didn't even know what that was. You know, I mean, I have no art background in the classic sense. I didn't go to art school. I was basically wanting to be a high school dropout because that was fashionable. My mom's was like, nah, I mean, graduate and, you know, try to go to college. And, you know, all these things are wonderful from a, you know, your parents trying to do right by you. But as an only child who was very open-minded but strong-headed, I was just all about the graph movement. It just fascinated me. I mean, to me, these kids were I was so in awe of them. And, you know, I love Steve McQueen. I love Sean Connery. I mean, you know, movie stars were cool. Music was cool. But these kids who lived in my city who were doing this work day and night were the most amazing people ever. And to be part of them, but more importantly, to be respected and accepted by them, that's really all I was looking for. I mean, this thing I'm doing with Levi's now, I've got my signature on stuff. I mean, the monetary reward of what I'm doing today, I'm very grateful, and sure, I mean, we all need money, but you know, I'll tell you, man, I get a better rush just out of seeing my tag.
Right.
And that hasn't changed since 1970 when I first put that signature up. And it's evolved. I mean, you know, I've evolved.
But I'm going to bring you back to what I was saying, because the transition was really important.
Yeah.
Right?
You mean back to 80 and Sam?
Well, from that, right, leading up to the Breako car,
Sure.
because the name that's so important, this train, but
Yes.
more importantly, you starting to define yourself differently amongst your peers as formal artists in a studio space.
Sure. Well, the Sam Esses, so in the summer of 80, and I think I painted the Break Train in the fall of 80, okay? So in the summer of 80, there was a gentleman named Sam Esses, kind of, what would you call him? You know, like someone who's giving money, you know.
Philanthropist.
A philanthropist. So he was, it wasn't even Sam, it was Sam's daughter, okay? Sam's daughter was up on what was going on, you know, up on current, you know, living a young person's life, walking around the streets, getting on the subway, seeing shit. Perhaps met Zephyr, because Andy Whitten, a.k.a. Zephyr, who was a very good friend of mine, came and said, hey, man, this guy wants to organize us to go into a studio. We're going to do, it's paid for 2 months. We've got materials, we've got spray cans, we've got canvas, we got everything you need. And let's make as many canvases as we can in the 60-day time we had. Let's invite in all the writers that would like to participate.
By the way, this was the A-list group of painters of that time.
Oh, yeah, because...
Dondi,
Yeah,
Duro, Kel,
we
Crash,
invite, your brother, of course, who's my guy.
And Butch and Mackie.
Everyone.
And so this was kind of the idea for us, for many of us, was this kind of very, oh, snap, now we can be a little bit more formal, and perhaps the museum concept comes up. Perhaps
Sure.
this is what could happen for us.
At the same time, Sam's vision was not to exploit us and cash in, which wound up happening in the next few years. Sam's idea, and he's a visionary, okay? He said, you know what? This is all going to disappear, guys. It's all going to be cleaned away. And, you know, the nature of graffiti anyway is you put something up, it gets gone over, it gets painted, opposing members come, they cross it out, they write toy, they write whack. You know, there's a history of shit in the streets. The streets always talk. And in the graffiti world, if you're on the good side of it, all good. If you're perceived to not be on the good side of it, shit goes south quick. So Sam's like, look, this thing ain't gonna last. It's 1980. We can already see the subway systems beginning to kind of want to control it now because the 70s was open season. From 1970 to 1979, we ran the shit, okay? And they tried to buff. They did buff. They buff meaning clean. They were cleaning on a cleaning schedule. But New York City's a big fucking city, pardon me. And they got a lot of trains.
Yep.
And we run 24/7. You know, we're not stopping.
No.
Yeah, we reduce schedules at night and on the weekend. But our shit's always, I mean, and like right now I'm talking shit, trains are running, okay? So, and possibly, although maybe not so much possibly, somebody's work might actually be running right now. I mean, kids are trying to do it. What happens is they see the 1 in 5,000 and they just, okay,
Right.
go clean that one and get him out of service.
So this was going on. This is kind of the era of, you know, a real kind of style war, meaning there were ideas that were, everyone had very distinct ideas and distinct groups were painting in a particular way, but then something incredible happened that really shifted. It was quite seismic, actually, when you did the break car.
So quickly now, so me and Zephyr were the studio managers of this session. We invited all these people in. A lot of people were intimidated to paint on canvas because no one had ever even been in an artist studio yet. You know what I mean? The concept to us at the time was very new. So we're inviting people. I remember we invited Lee Quinones in. Lee, who had recently had a show in Rome. And probably like 1979, he did something in Rome, which made him a megastar in New York because, like, oh my God, you were in Rome, you know, like you went to Rome, you know, like the whole idea was mind-blowing. So we invited Lee in, and, you know, we had the whole shit set up. We'd bring the artist in, we got the canvases, some of which had been painted, we had stacked materials ready to go, the paint's all there. Very inviting, and, you know, a lot of people were like, oh shit, yeah, let's do it.
Did you take paint from that experience? Were you taking, when you got to the Breako car, were you already, you know, at Sam Esses? Because here's what's important about that whole car, and I want you guys to know this, that traditionally the graffiti writers wrote their names and with letters, but this was a complete full abstraction, as in the kind of iconography that we're kind of seeing now in Futura's work. So Futura really kind of matured on that production, and not just you, but it kind of sent this seismic shockwave throughout America and Europe.
Which took years to manifest, because at the time, okay, so at the end of SE Studios, we had maybe 44 canvases were made by 42 different people. Somebody did 2 each or whatever. But so we had a really beautiful array, and the collection that Sam envisioned was made. And by the way, Sam's idea was, we're doing this, and we're archiving it. Yeah. And we're going to revisit this in 10 years, in 20 years, and not for nothing, recently, a very famous artist, whose name will not be mentioned, bought the whole shit. So, and God bless him buying it, because he's going to do the right thing by it. His name starts with a K. However, we did all that, and I did nothing but direct. I stretched all the canvases. I primed them. You know, I was kind of like the main artist guy in that space, making anything available for whoever wanted to do whatever. And I didn't paint until the very end. Like, when everybody was done, I went and did a painting based on having witnessed everybody paint, which was amazing, right? I saw like, whatever was created during the, studio hours, I opened and I closed. And I saw everything in that 2-month period. I saw everybody paint. I saw people painting left-handed. I saw people painting upside down. I saw everything. And really, it was such an education for me as just a creative guy watching people work, which to me is still the beauty of any of this crap. Like, seeing someone do what they do, that's the essence. So it could be a theatrical performance. Oh, look at the B-boys. Oh, shit. Oh, my God, look at him. Just watching someone do something is awesome.
Yeah. We're gonna move up a little bit because now the break cold car happens.
Yeah.
And then a couple.
So wait, no, let me just quickly say. So at the end of Esses, I realized, like, man, I can't compete. I cannot compete with all these guys. I mean, I was kind of okay with letters, but there were so many better style masters, you know, as far as the alphabet went. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna try something different. And by the way, I am Futura, and this kind of almost makes sense in like, well, what should Futura's work look like? Okay, should it be just derivative of him and him and him and him and him and you? No. Let me go off on a tangent.
So what was influencing that? Was it modern art or was it in your head?
Yeah, it's always been in my head. And it was just about trying to find my own space. You know, like just get somewhere that I'm not part. I mean, I always want to be part of it, but I want to also people understand, yeah, I'm part of it, but I'm me. You know,
right.
And I thought graffiti was very great at that, in that everyone's tag was completely unique.
Right, and what's interesting is that when you started developing that painting, these icons, right? And you can better just
you mean like elements in my work?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you could kind of name some of them that you use.
I mean, you know,
the towers. And
the cranes, which kind of came from radio transmissions. And oh, by the way, prior to 1980 and all that, I spent 4 years in the U.S. military, and I was on aircraft carriers. And so that 4 years. Was my higher education, not in art, not in academia, but in life. And, you know, I'm a bit of a observant guy. And I was looking around and seeing shit, and I'm like, oh, okay. So when I adapted that to something like physical, like painting the brake car, and thanks to one of my best friends ever, Don D. White, rest in peace, who took me to his yard to paint that train. And it's crazy, too, because an 18-year-old kid at the time could take possession of a New York City subway yard. And multiple writers, that's their, you know, like Cliff, as you mentioned earlier, Phase, Stay High. I mean, so many of these kids, not me, but others, physically claimed New York City property as their own, and, oh, let me invite you to my yard.
So let me ask you this. So when by that point, there was, we saw.
I had all this shit in my head, and I was just ready to pop.
Right, and that was kind of, we were seeing a big transition in terms of where do we take this? Because after that.
And me and your brother had already done the Kel Futura.
Yeah, that's right. That's
exactly.
right. Which this is going to segue into what happens next, which is the early galleries, right? So all of a sudden, things like the Patty Astor and the Fun Gallery happen.
And actually, I would say, shout out to Diego Cortez in New York New Wave.
Yes.
At a space called PS1. It's in Queens. It's still a there. Spot. It's still a thing. But in 1981, I believe it's 81, that was this massive group show where it was all of the subway folk. Rem LZ was there, Ali was there, Dandini, all of us. And this influx now of what's considered to be this new art movement in New York City, which was all coming out of downtown.
That's right.
And I hooked up with Keith. And I met
that's Keith Haring, by the way.
That's Keith Haring, by the way, yeah. And I met a homeless kid named Jean. That's Jean-Michel Basquiat. And they were coming to us knowing about art because they had read. They had read about art. When I first did the Break Train and my first canvas, people, because they need to make references even today. I mean, everyone's going to say, oh, yeah, his work, her work reminds me of so-and-so's work. Now, whether it does or it doesn't, they're just trying to explain to you the kind of family that they're in. And for me, they were saying, oh, yes, he's Kandinsky. And I'm like, well, who the fuck is Kandinsky? And why are you comparing me to someone? Okay, yeah, I get it. But it's also a disrespect to me because you're almost saying I'm biting something or I've been influenced by something, which is absurd. I don't even know what you're talking about. So that doesn't work, right? And at the time, I was a little offended because I'm like, wow, that's fucked up. Like, I'm doing me, but they're thinking I'm doing him. And I said, you know what? And this is 81, 82. I said, man, one day, people are going to be referencing other people's work to my work. And I just kept it moving. I didn't let it deter me. It kind of inspired me to kind of, well, one, I had to read up a little bit on the Russian constructivists. I found out about Kandinsky, Malevich, Klee. You know, I did my homework. Oh, Bauhaus. You know, stuff, like I say, I don't know fuck all about, nor could I have cared, because it's like, what's that got to do with me tomorrow? And how am I going to live my life in New York City? What, reading about art? Like, no. Right. So it's just existing in your environment and trying to either be a decent person. You know, because another thing, I mean, we were slightly criminal. You know, it was a little bit of misdemeanor crimes. I mean, we're jumping over turnstiles. We're breaking into subway tunnels. But I mean, I wasn't a stick-up kid. You know, I wasn't a real thug, but we were considered thugs.
Right, but what's interesting, what happens next is that you start getting into the galleries,
Yeah.
downtown scene starts emerging
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But then as you really formalized your iconography, it started becoming a commercial art.
Yes.
And this is important because he segues into the commercial art space. And one of the first projects was with The Clash.
Yes.
And that was epic.
Well, it's funny because
Epic for us.
I never even heard of them, okay? They're coming to New York City in 1981, and I get a call from a club promoter. He's like, hey, there's a British group, The Clash. Have you heard of them? I was like, London Calling? He's like, yeah, those guys. But I mean, I'm not a punk. I'm a b-boy. I'm from the New York story. So yeah, you know, Brit influence, okay, yeah, the Beatles, the Stones, you know, Led Zepp, but The Clash? I mean, you know, punk was relatively new coming out of the 70s. Too new and too foreign for us to really adapt to initially, but these boys saw me. I was asked to do a backdrop for them with Zephyr and Kylie Jenkins. The shit was so big, it was like 20 meters by 20 meters. We had to paint it in a public park in New York City. It was, you know, no one had studio space. No one had a studio. So this huge-ass backdrop that we painted in, you know, like a massive flat space, wound up being the backdrop for The Clash during their performances in New York. When they saw it, they were like, oh, who's the bloke who did that? And then I met them, and they were like, how'd you like to come to Europe with us and come on tour? And I was like, bet, because when I was in the military, I'd been to Asia. I'd been to, I'd been all over the planet, but I hadn't been to Europe. And I was a bit of a romantic, and the whole notion of like American in Paris, UK.
Were you already thinking of yourself or connecting to the art and artist personality then? Was that still kind of distant?
It was still distant. What I was doing was I was thinking at the time, man, this is a great opportunity for me to become not the ambassador and kind of almost diplomat that I kind of feel like I am from my culture, but it's like, man, just to get to new territories and to talk about who I am and who we are was a big hit for me. And not for nothing, when I mean, like I say, rest in peace, Joe Strummer, one of the sweetest guys, and kind of almost like a father figure to me in his wisdom and the way he talked to me. And Joe really liked me. Not like I'm unlikable, but Joe really did like me, and I love Joe. And so I learned a lot with those guys. I was on tour with them for 5 weeks, at the same time that Wild Style and Style Wars were being filmed.
Those were two important films in hip-hop culture, early hip-hop culture. Wild Style being a feature film that has a script and a narrative with actual hip-hop icons in it, and
Yep.
Style Wars being a documentary. And I recommend you seeing
Oh, yeah,
those.
you have to. I mean, there's subway art and spray can art wind up being the New Testament and the Old Testament for our culture in terms of books. Wild Style and Style Wars are equally as important, if not more, because most people don't read books. Most people are fascinated by visual imagery, music, and both of those films are rich with both. While they were being made, I was on tour with The Clash. I left New York day one, got my sneakers, got my laces, got my Kangol, got my fucking shit looking cool. I came back looking like some wannabe hipster from the UK with like a grease back thing, a leather jacket, I had some Vivienne Westwood pants, I had some Teddy Boy shit on. I mean, I looked like a doofus, okay? But I had already been influenced by these guys. And I came back and fans were like, yo, what happened to you? I was like, dude, I went to Europe, okay? You fucking gotta get out there.
But one could say, you know, this is the interesting thing because both groups are outsiders and marginalized and rebellious and against a system. So there was this kindred spirit between the B-boys and the punk rockers.
Absolutely. That's really why they got onto our culture. And even before they took me away, when they came to New York that year, 81, Don Letts was their film guy who later went into a group called Big Audio Dynamite when the Clash disbanded. But Don was one of the coolest motherfuckers I ever met, and I know he's out there in the world, and I love you, Don. Totally beautiful man. But yeah, he was telling me at the time, he's like, dude, what you guys are doing here, this kind of rebel action against society and like represent your own identity and push your expression, he's like, that's what we're about. You know, so yes, there was totally this, you know, which from a local point of view, how would you know? You know what I mean? And then once I found out, I was like, oh yeah. Now, the crazy shit is, when I was the B-boy and the Kangol and all that shit, and I was then, I couldn't get into shit. I could not walk into Studio 54, any dope spot in New York. They'd look at me and be like, whatever. Yeah. And so I couldn't get into shit. I could have a fly girl, still couldn't get into shit. But dude, the very next day I came back from the Clash tour, I was like flavor of the month. And people were like, yo, that's Futura. Oh shit, you're in the Clash. Because not for nothing, the Clash were like super fucking famous, right?
Huge.
And just because I didn't know about them, it didn't mean anyone else did. And not for nothing, I learned about them real quick, and I love those guys. And so I was performing on stage, you know, it sounds pretty cool, but performing on stage with the Clash in Paris, in London, in Austria, Vienna, hello. And so just having the time of my life, really, and kind of not mindless, but just zombie walking through the whole thing, right? Because it was just so amazing.
And what's amazing about it is that that's really the genesis of the Futura, not just the Futura name, brand, the personality, the persona. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you know what it is like I finally got educated, right? I was like, okay, you know, and like I wasn't stupid, but I wasn't up on a lot of stuff. But man, I really, you know, kind of crib sheet or whatever, you know, I like learned up fast.
So that gave you a taste of the world, right?
Yes.
And then, and also, again, going back to the original question about doing commercial work, because after that, you started doing stuff with Mo Wax and Uncle. So you started, you know, venturing into the music design space. And that's again, where you reinvent yourself as a designer.
Yes, well, unfortunately, we were in the 80s, we were in the early 80s. We came back. There was a heyday from, I would say, you know, we were saying 80 is the breaking point of the, I would say like that's when the underground road, you know, we sort of came above ground. And we're trying to understand what else could we do now that we're up here. And the Clash thing was amazing for my career and notoriety and just name recognition to get people to know who I was or to be interested in me. And then the next few four or 5 years was the influx of the graffiti exportation to Europe. And the Europeans were very important because they were supporting what we were doing and looking at it like, oh, guys, you guys are amazing. When the American perspective was like, fuck, man, you guys are horrible. So it was about discovering what was what, and that's when a lot of people were running to Europe for exhibitions, blah, 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 what have you. However, quite short-lived. In my humble opinion, by 1985, over, dead. We were no longer the flavor of the month. No one cared about us. You have new emerging artists, i.e. the Keith Herrings, the Jean-Michels of the world, and people were just not ready for the kind of, you know, these guys don't really know what they're doing. The art world needs you to pay tribute to itself. You know, to me, it exists only because the people who have been successful. Why is Jean-Michel so successful? Well, he's been dead a quarter century, no doubt. But when he was active, he knew about Twombly. He knew about Pink. He knew that he was making these strokes that people were like, yo, my kid could do that shit. And I was like, yeah, maybe, but does she know what she's doing? And everyone thought Jean was kind of like, oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. But no, my nigga was mad smart, okay? And he was paying homage and kind of throwing it back in their faces. And they loved it, right? They loved it. And basically, I mean, I'm sad he killed himself in a sort of like overdose type way. But man, he manipulated those guys.
It was completely calculated, but
without question.
This, you know, there's a word I wanted to say about you that I think kind of encompasses all of this that we're talking about, and I want to try to get in as much as possible. And because you went to the Navy, Futura is tactical. He thinks tactically, I think, meaning.
No doubt.
Meaning, of course, there is a inherent strategy.
Without question.
Right?
Yeah.
And that when we think about this kind of him taking on the Clash and then proliferating his name, really just getting up, right?
That's
it's
it.
another way of getting up. But
I'm doing it right now at the Levi's booth, but that's another story.
No, exactly. And this continues as you go into, you know,
the Mowax era.
And you do the commercial stuff with the albums and stuff like that, but then it leads into something else.
Okay.
Which is also very important to understand, because it's really the genesis of the concept of streetwear, right? Now all of a sudden, like, well, if we resurface from the trains, what do we apply this to? And many of us were like, well, what's next? You know, some kids were in art school, so they were getting formalized and saying, well, we could study architecture, design. I was a fashion design student at art and design, and we were kind of like wayward, like what happens when graffiti dies?
Yep.
And so as it was dying, Futura was already kind of setting yet another trajectory for the name and the brand. So GFS comes into play.
GFS, yes.
Please, let's start with that.
Okay, so as you're saying, and not for nothing, Keith had showed us how to do that in the 80s with the pop-up shop, right? Keith's idea was, yes, and much to Andy's sort of tutelage, was that, yeah, you can be a fine artist, you can delve into the commercial world, you can do products, you can put your name on something, you can make a product and put your name on it. You know, the establishment of a brand and the branding of the individual was something I kind of picked up from Keith, really, or, you know, just seeing the trends. And so GFS was the first independent clothing company we had. It was 1991, 92, just before Mowax.
And the GFS is?
Derivative, absolutely derivative of the subway.
What does it represent, the GFS?
Oh, yeah, well, the G, the F, and the S, our logo, are subway lines in New York City. And so we were still, and not for nothing, we started, but PNB started before we did. And so PNB, Post No Bills, Please No Bacon, whatever, right? Whatever the acronym meant. They had sort of already done something where they did a subway, like an architectural schematic of a subway car. And I saw it, I was like, fuck, that's clever. Because they found the bridge for me. Like, I saw that and I was like, that's the bridge. Because we all have this graffiti history. And yeah, we can't survive in the gallery. We're actually too ahead of our time. But what can we do to kind of keep the creativity flowing and develop our styles? Which we were dripping in style. So we're like, oh, let's make T-shirts. And just like we're pulling screens, we were fucking. I had a four-wheel press. We were screening shit, and it felt great because we were doing our own thing without sort of anybody, you know, there's no fucking Geppetto, you know what I mean? Like, and I don't fucking like Geppetto. I don't like anybody behind me, you know, and yeah, Mario Puzo, the Godfather. Love it. Hated the logo because of what it represents, right? I don't like that I'm controlling you shit. So the independence, and I even say to this day, I tell my son, man, try to be independent, okay? However, remember, it costs money to be independent. Like, you can't be broke and be independent. Because at some point, you're going to need something. You're going to need a meal, and someone's going to have to pay that bill. And so, you know what I did? I worked. I worked my fucking ass off. I worked 4 jobs, 3 jobs, 2 jobs. And when my kids came along, I worked 5 jobs. Some were illegitimate, some were straight up legitimate.
And you were a well-known bike messenger.
I was one of the coolest bike messengers. Oh, yeah. Oh, by the way, I'm at the beginning of that fucking movement.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm riding a fix in New York City with no brakes.
Boom.
Back in 87.
Boom.
By now.
So, well, what's interesting about this is then, he makes a great point about independence, because then the idea of collaborating with brands starts to happen. You do Project Dragon.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so now after
That's
that.
like 95, 96.
Right. So when we talk about after,
And we're amazing days right there.
Right. So
Okay.
I'm curious about that transition to where you're like, say, okay, now I'm independent. Futura is the brand in sight.
Yes. Well, I mean, I was still operating in the group. I hadn't yet gone Futura Laboratory, right? I hadn't yet okay, let me go solo. I was still in a group. 3 of us in GFS, 3 of us in PD, AKA Project Dragon. We're graphic design. I mean, we were using in 1991, we were using 386 PC computers with Corel Draw, okay? That's my inception. Boom. 94, 5, somebody's like, yo, have you seen these Macintoshes? I'm like, what's that? Apple Farm? He's like, you're close. And here comes Apple. And I was like, fuck, man, that shit looks dope. $5,000, $6,000, what? I can't afford that. My man's like, yo, they got them in Kinko's. You could rent time at Kinko's for like, $15 an hour and play with them. So I was like, no doubt. Yep. I took a job at Kinko's, okay? I took a job at Kinko's just to exploit them. I was their color copy operator.
Tactical.
Totally tactical. And kind of premeditated, right? Because I was like, well, first of all, someone told me about Mac, but then someone's like, oh, there's this thing called the internet, right? It's coming. I was like, well, what's that? Oh, yeah, you plug in and you get online. And for me, okay, so we're talking about the brake train in 80. We're talking about late 80s, I'm a bicycle messenger and kind of at the forefront of that. And once again, yeah, I could take a little credit for it, but at the time, it wasn't like I thought I was doing anything other than what I was doing.
So the allure of the galleries was just not even there for you?
No, because I hit and missed in the 80s.
Yeah.
I got jerked a little bit.
Yeah.
I felt like I got used because the Soho galleries grabbed me because of the brake train, because of the Clash event, effect. And oh yeah, Futura, he's a good name just to have on a bill, alongside 15 other artists who I never heard of or whatever. And having a graffiti writer kind of legitimized for them this other influx of street artists who were not under the same umbrella, but catching some of the shade of it. But really, for me, my life changed in 1995, 6. Well, my life changed when my son was born, and then subsequently my daughter. But in 1995, 96, when I got online, thanks to your brother, who had kind of taught me a little bit about what the web was.
Yeah.
My God, you guys were amazing. So these kids were doing, fucking JavaScript, like all kinds of shit.
We brought hip hop online.
Yes.
We brought, but here's again, we're going to segue into something also that's very important. His impact in that, because you were such an
Futura2000.com.
It was such an iconoclast experience. A lot of us were like, holy shit, it makes no sense, but that's why it makes sense.
Exactly.
So
here we were in the 80s. We're 70s, we're on trains. 80s, we popped up. We had a little experience in the galleries. Didn't really work. I had to work my way through the 80s. Here comes the 90s. Clothing companies, a new direction for us to find our expression and ourselves. Mid-90s, the internet, shit's coming around. I'm already not too bad on the computer. And then I figured out, I said to my boy, well, wow, how do you make, I'm looking at the web. I'm like, well, how do you do this? He's like, man, it's mad simple. You just learn HTML or, whatever was the code of the moment. But I was like, how, man? I didn't go to school. He's like, well, you could pick up a book or you could simply copy and paste. Back then when the web was first online, you could look at web pages and you could view source. So you view the source, you copy that, you paste it into a notepad document, a blank sheet, and then you go in and you change the imagery around and you change the color of the background of the page. And so, not for nothing, in a weekend, I did it. I put up a website. It wasn't Futura2000.com yet because even at the time, the .com thing insinuated that you were a business. Because initially, everybody on web, that rush to money that existed, right? The golden era of what the first online thing was going to be. Everybody, it's like when you come here, people are like, oh, money. They got more money than sand. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. And the web at the time, everybody was looking at it as a money grab. And if you had a .com, it just seemed like you were commercial, and you're asking for loot. I was not. I was looking for a new wall to write on.
Exactly, and so all the not just iconography, but I think
language.
This language,
poetry.
It was complete abstraction. It was absolutely great. So I'm gonna do a speed round with you because we're running out of time.
Go for it.
Because that was also important. So as
you can actually find that. There's a site that's called the waybackmachine.com.
Yes.
It's an archival dump for mad old shit on the web that. Most millennials like, what are you talking about? Who cares? I mean, I want follows, I want likes, I want people looking at my stories. But not for nothing, guys. I mean,
so much innovation.
We were here before that, okay?
There was an incredible amount of innovation at that time.
Yes.
But again, the thread here is tactical, right? So he has been building his name in different spaces for many years.
Interesting.
And no, it's true.
Yeah.
I followed it. I worked similarly to you.
Absolutely. We were like parallelograms.
And the thing is, it's about getting up, right?
No doubt.
But the quality of getting up keeps getting better, right? So what happens next, right? Because, again, in the canon of our history, he is firmly placed, right? And again, since we were ahead of the curve and the galleries and museums still weren't really catching on, and he's placing his name and developing the brand relationships, right? So we're going to come back to why all this makes any freaking sense, right? It's because people like him and that you go from this history of hitting different places and where all those things matter. The web matters now to brands.
Sure.
The collaboration matters to brand. The kind of endorsement and credibility you give to brands matters, right?
Agreed.
And so, I'll go down a quick drill of some of the people you've worked with, and from Nike, North Face, Metacom, Supreme, Levi's, Bathing Ape, Converse, Nike. It goes Agnes B.
Wow, so boring.
And so it's interesting, right? So this kind of, it's not a. Usually brands co-opt stuff, but in a way, you've co-opted them to kind of push your brand and your images, your art.
If I could tell you a lot of it was unconscious, I wouldn't be lying. Because, I am calculated and I am tactical. But at the same time, I don't have a master plan. I'm kind of an organic flow guy. And I'd rather let things happen. Because my experience has told me, I just turned 63, okay? So my experiences have told me that it's better to allow shit to happen on its own terms and work with the people who you really have affection for. And a lot of people, all of this is a money grab as well. Everybody's just trying to make it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's the aesthetic that you carry inside of yourself as a person that really matters. And not for nothing, people see through it in a minute. If you're just there to kind of get a check and be out, well, hey, man, welcome to the club and put your name on a list of thousands of other people who won't achieve shit in the big picture. I feel like I've been a as I started to say, like just a real guy that isn't looking for anything other than the moment and making it cool for us all and giving my all at all times. And, I always tell my son, just don't promise so much, under-promise, over-deliver. Basically, don't be screaming about all the shit you can do. Just do what the fuck you do. It's like sports. It's like anything. Let what you do speak for itself. And in the end, people will, right? For real. Because in the end, people will see through the bullshit. And in the end, today, people see the bullshit way quicker. So it might help if you're not full of shit. Because then they'll never catch you, okay? And then you can just keep walking through spaces, doing cool things, interacting with people, making an impression on them. They walk away going, like I said, the perception when I walk in the room is like, oh shit, that's Futura. When I leave the room, they're like, damn, that dude is mad cool. And that's what I want to leave with people. I don't want them to think like, oh my God, like, you don't know who I am?
Yeah, but you
Not
have
for nothing, I know it doesn't mean shit. I mean, to me, it actually doesn't mean anything. What matters is my children and my girlfriend and the people I love. And this event here and being with Carlos and working for my client that brought me here. You know, I want to deliver on the promise that I gave, but I said I was going to do this, but I'm going to do that. You know what I mean? Because you didn't know that, but that's who I am. You know, like, that's going to come as a bonus after being with me. You're going to be like, damn, man, that guy, like, he's a real guy, and he's not complaining. He's not a dick. He's not an asshole. Because I don't want to ever be that. There's too many of those people, okay? So I've always tried to, like, navigate.
So you're that real guy.
I am that real guy.
And you have this tremendous legacy that you're leaving for generations to inherit.
Hopefully.
No, absolutely.
Okay.
Unequivocally.
Okay.
Unequivocally, because, I mean, drill down the list we went through
Yes.
now. And yes, you're still active in your community, which is great. You maintain that.
Yep.
But also, in these later years, you're a studio artist.
Yes.
So we're going to come back around to where some of the original thought was about you were not accepted in galleries or
Yep.
understood, and now you're revered, and now you're showing big paintings, and they become so much more important to us that you are actually doing that, because this is the legacy work as well.
Sure.
Right? It's not product. Product is a very different kind of legacy than the painting by Futura.
Without question.
And you've gotten, you know, you did some big shows and continue to do big museum shows and stuff like that. Looking back and where that is for you now,
Yeah.
tell me about that. Tell me how you feel about that.
Well, I feel great because although I'm involved in a commercial project here, yeah, I mean, half of my thing is that 25% is I'm super good with Adobe products, so I can bust out anything in that realm. Third part is the fine art part. The future is paintings, my paintings, which I've, not for nothing, like, I wasn't pursuing the gallery as a thing for me. It didn't really mean anything. Like I said, I have other priorities in life, but now that I'm at this point in my life, I'm saying, you know what? That's the one thing that I have that I'm never going to commercialize, really. You know what I mean? Because I can make a living in these other areas.
He's been very elusive about, I mean, there's those of us who know you.
Well, not for nothing. I'm a little stingy with my shit.
You completely.
I am, because
Completely.
it's like, I mean, I see artists that are so prolific, and they're just banging it out and banging it out and banging it out. I'm like, in a way, are you flooding your market? You know, are you over trying to do it? And we're back to the organic flow. Hey, life's happening in such a way where here I am now, back on that track, trying to pursue. And, you know, if I put my mind to it, I can come up with some good paintings. That's no doubt.
And here's what's interesting, because, again, the tactician that he is, that, for instance, the Valmorda show you did, and
Yeah.
in New York, this very big, beautiful, one of the most beautiful shows, but also the tie with Hennessy, right? So the thing is that the being calculated enough to say, look, I'll fuck with this brand if it's going to elevate
Yes.
this.
Well, the beauty of, let's say, Valmorda was a great show, one of my first shows in New York in many years. But the beauty of the Hennessy thing is that at least they're saying to me, and it's similar to what Moex did in the 90s, is that they're like, you know what, dude, we really like your art, and we want to use, it's wrong use of the word use, but we would like to use your art in a kind of incorporation with our music, but we're not backgrounding it. You know, we're not just going to put logos and all this lettering and shit. We're going to let your artwork just be the thing. And I really respected them for that, because a lot of people who know me through that Moex experience kind of almost discovered my art through that. You know, the people that didn't know about me in the 80s, never heard of me in the 70s, got a chance to see my work through a medium which was quite accessible to a young audience. And for me now, yeah, I mean, I'm grateful that my demographics are somewhere between 22 and 47. You know what I mean? Like all you guys, and a couple of older people here, no doubt. But, you know, the gist of this event en masse is about those numbers, you know. And so I'm fortunate that that community is there for me. And as far as my paintings go and what I plan in the future, well, yeah, I am going to, I mean, although, like, Would I like to, have an exhibition in a mega museum? Of course I would. But I also know, like, when I'm dead, it's gonna happen, okay? So I'm not rushing to get to somewhere that I'm not feeling comfortable in arriving to. And I'm feeling more comfortable now. Which is what I say, like, if I got another quarter century, oh yeah, it's gonna happen.
This is just words of wisdom, and I appreciate that because.
And I have the long view.
Yes,
It's not a long con. There's no con here. I'm not going to con you because I'm not going to ever gyp anyone. I'm always going to give you quality. But when I was 15, thinking 2000, hey man, you're projecting out 30 years. Well, you know what? I'm doing the same thing right now. I mean, wow, what's that? 2050? Fuck yeah, love to get there. So just to say that to me, there's no urgency to do something because there's time. Everyone else feels like, oh shit, it's now. It's hot. Like even back then, oh, the fire's hot. Let's stoke it. Hey, you know what? Yeah, the fire's hot. Let's not stoke it. Let it go out. We'll fucking build another one over here. I mean, this concept that I was raised by and how my parents tried to teach me, it was all wrong. I mean, it was thoughtful and caring, but it was misguided. And I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be told how to do. I can work that out myself. You know what I mean? I can figure it. I mean, I'm not a moron. I can suss out a room and know where I should be, know where I should sit. I should break out, you know what I mean? And I'll find myself somewhere. I'll find comfort in my skin, which I totally have, and I'll just be able to be, once again, like someone sincere that's not, I have no agenda. There's nothing I want that anyone in this room has. Nothing. Not your money, not your admiration, because I'll walk into another space and maybe I won't find it here. But I won't be upset about it. I'll simply move on. I just keep it moving. And as long as I'm not hurting one in any process, or I'm certainly not stabbing anyone in the back, I'm always going to be fine because no one can ever come back to me on some bullshit, which is maybe how I've survived so long.
And so, keeping it moving.
Yeah.
And
we're almost out.
As we're thinking about the future, right? And the potential and the possibilities of application, right? Application of, let's say, the both artistically and through fine art, but also in the product space or design space. What is it? What would you like to? What one particular thing would you like to tackle? What project would you really like to see happen for yourself in the future?
No disrespect to Heron Preston, I love him, but I want to work with NASA. I want to, maybe Elon Musk or something. I want to hook up with one of these people in the next 10, 15 years.
Do you know what that looks like? What capacity?
Maybe design some shit. Maybe get on a flight. Maybe go somewhere.
I'd love to see that.
That's what I want to do, really. I want to get off the planet, okay? For a moment. I don't know. Maybe it's my last trip. That'd be dope, But just to say that the future's unlimited, guys, and I love you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh, by the way, check out my dope-ass Levi jacket I hooked up.